Hi, this is Scott Garibay. Let's talk. What I want to talk about today is Dungeons and Dragons in 5th edition, and I want to explore the question: what should be the natural gender shape of a Dungeons and Dragons table? Okay. All right. So, what do I mean by gender shape? Um, so basically, what I mean is, if you have a traditional table, okay, of let's say 5 players, because I think most games are 5 players. I absolutely hear you. I know a lot of you out there have 6, 7, 8 people at your table. I've even heard stories at 9 people at a table in a Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition game. But I think 5 is a very clear number. Now, why are we going to take a 5-player number? Well, one, I do know a lot of games have 5 players. It's a really, usually when you ask, hey, how many players at the table, the general answer, even in the books, is 4 or 5 players. Right? The game is structured for 4 or 5 players. So one thing that's really interesting is I've been watching the 1983 Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, and I'm absolutely loving it. It's really, really wonderful. But there were 5 players there, right? And it was Hank, and it was Bobby, and it was Presto, and it was Diana, and it was Sheila, okay? And that was a gender shape of 3 males, 2 females, okay? All right, so I want to talk about what should be at the macro level. What should 51% of all games be from a gender perspective, right? Now, I can hear you already. You're like, wait, shouldn't it be anything that we want? I don't think so, right? So, one, if you have 0 players, if you have 0 female players at your table, you should really think twice about that. Is there a reason there are 0 female players at your table? If you have 0 male players at your table, is there a reason for that? Are you excluding males on purpose? If you're a male table, are you excluding female players on purpose? If you're excluding anyone, you really need to think twice about that. So I think it is a valid question to say what should be the gender shape of a table. Also, I'm going to ask for some forgiveness on this, right? So I would love to have a conversation about how many non-binaries should be at the table, how many trans should be at the table. But I'm not there yet from my learning perspective, right? So I do think there is a conversation being had right now in Dungeons and Dragons of, hey, do we have too many male voices being heard at the tables right now and not enough female voices heard? I think it's a real question. I think it still has valid. There's real reasons to ask that question. We absolutely should be asking how many non-binary should be at the table from the gender perspective. How many trans should be at the table from that perspective. I don't feel comfortable discussing that yet because I don't think I've mastered the question of how many male players and how many female players. I'm still working on that end, right? So I would just beg your patience. I think there will be, maybe a year or 2 from now, I think I'll understand the non-binary and the trans experience at the D&D table enough to even discuss that. At this point, I just don't think my knowledge is high enough. So I appreciate, the scope of what I'm talking about today is how many male, how many female should be at the table. And I'm going to tell you right now, I think that one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition. I just completed the Orange Spine Easy collection, 12 books, all written from 1980 to 1987. It is the most encapsulated, most cohesive version of any Dungeons & Dragons edition ever presented, right? From a visual perspective and from a rules perspective. It's absolutely phenomenal, these 12 books. And I've been looking at D&D 1E a lot, right? And one of the beefs that people have, they're like, oh, D&D 1E is not that woke. And I'm like, whoa, man, you might want to slow your roll there before you're saying that. I think people are just slapping a non-woke label on D&D 1E. And the more I look at it, the more I'm thinking, man, that thing looked woke as heck, right? Because get this. I think that the D&D 1983 cartoon predicted the correct macro level gender shape of the most common Dungeons and Dragons table. I'm not saying there can't be exceptions. There absolutely can be, 1 female player and 4 male. There can be 4 female and 1 player at the exceptions. I'm talking at the macro level. What should be the macro level? And when should we be calm, right? and say, hey, we've worked hard and we've arrived at a fair number, right? When the macro level table, the 51% of the tables, what do they have, right? And I think the correct ratio is 60 to 40, right? 60% male, 40% female. Why am I saying this? Well, first of all, I think this is what Gary Gygax was projecting. I think he wanted a 60-40 split, right? And he showed it to us in the players, and the player characters in the Dungeons & Dragons 1983 cartoon, right? So you have Hank, Eric, and Bob. Hank the Cavalier, Eric the Ranger, Bobby the Barbarian, Sheila the Rogue. Was she a rogue? Yeah, Sheila. Oh, it was Sheila the Thief. I think she was Sheila. I think it was literally Sheila the Thief, right? And then Diana the Acrobat, right? Okay, so I think the correct amount is 60-40. I agree with Gary Gygax. I think that was a pretty woke perspective for 1983. Now, I hear you. You're like, wait, Scott, why should there be 3 male players at the table and 2 female players at the table? Well, this is what I think. I could be wrong on this, and I invite correction. If my understanding of if you think that my analysis of this is wrong, I'm more than willing to hear you, and I'll correct my opinion if your data is sound and even if your logic is sound, right? So here's why I think the macro level table will have 3 males and it will then it will have 2 females. First of all, that's close to 50-50, right? Which is good. And and I really think it's incredibly important that every table has female players at the table, okay? All right, so why should there be a majority male and a minority female? I think the only reason why we should be comfortable with that ratio is 5 is a standard number, so one is going to outweigh the other. And the biggest thing is I'm not sure that as many females are interested in Dungeons & Dragons as males from one perspective. Dungeons & Dragons was born out of a war game, okay? And so it is, in many ways, a simulation of war, right? We definitely have a situation where females are now going into war with males, but that is brand new. It's only existed for maybe 20 to 40 years, right? At large scale, where equal numbers in combat, right? And so there's been this situation where women have not been going to war for millennia, and men have. So unfortunately, I think Dungeons & Dragons, this is undebatable. It absolutely emphasizes combat over exploration and interaction, right? And until the game flips and has more of a focus on exploration and interaction than combat, an activity that women have been excluded from for millennia, I don't think we're going to have a minority of women interested in D&D over men interested in D&D, only because there has been this traditional structure for war where men go to war and women don't. And that has been here not for decades, not for century, but for millennia. And it's going to take a little bit of time. I'd say maybe 1 century. So 1 century from now, I think we very well may be able to flip that, right? And go to 60-40, where it would be 3 out of 5 players would be female and 2 out of 5 players would be male. But right now, I think if you have a table, if you have a table of 5 people, right, and 2 are female and 3 are male, at the macro level, you're doing it right. Now, I totally understand there's going to be exceptions to this, and if your table is different, but as a hobby, I think if we have 3 males at the table, 2 females at the table, that's pretty good, fighting an uphill river flow of millennia of men being sent into combat and women not being sent into combat. And I think we can give the hobby 1 more century before we flip those numbers, right? And I just want to remind everybody, if you have zero females at your table, you really need to check and see why that is, right? Also, I'll put my cards on the table, right? So I just finished a 1-year campaign, and in that campaign, 50% of my players were female, and 50% of my players were male. That only had 2 players, 1 female, 1 male, right? And then my current game, we have 3 players, and they are all male. But I want to be clear, I invited 2 females who said no based on time constraints. Right? Actually, one has no interest in D&D and said, "Thank you. I don't even have any interest in trying it. It's just not my jam." The other one said, "I would like to play, but I can't from a time constraint." So, I currently am in a game with 100% males, but we did invite 2 females in there, and actually, I invited 1 male and then 2 female, and then filled up the rest with male players. So that's where I'm at right now. And if you're like, "Hey, you should get that fixed," just let me know. So that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Am I not thinking any of that correctly? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know. I want to think about this right. I want to think about this smartly. Love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.